Well, we are live for the next Pink Panther Presents an Author Talk with Heather Christie. Before I introduce our author, I just want to thank Pink Panther Magazine and the Detroit Writers Guild for making this possible, and also for Heather Christie and all the authors who so willingly come and talk about their writing and their writing processes and their literary lifestyle. So Heather Christie is the award-winning author of the young adult novel, What the Valley Knows, and the producer of the national storytelling phenomenon, Listen to Your Mother, Greater Burks. Her second novel, The Lying Season, will be published in fall 2021. She also co-produces Tales from the Other Side with Amy Impalazaria. I probably butchered that. You can find Heather at her website, www.heatherchristiebooks.com. So thank you for joining us today, Heather.
And thank you for having me.
Excellent. So your bio lists some amazing literary and creative accomplishments. What inspired you to pursue these creative ambitions? I mean, we have the novels and the Listen to Your Mother local series and Tales from the Other Side. What inspired you to pursue some of these creative ambitions?
So I started out my life as a creative person. I thought I was going to be an actress as a child. And I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm about an hour northwest of Philadelphia, pretty close to the small town I grew up in. And so as a teenager, I would go to school, and this was before like homeschooling was in vogue, but I would go to school for half the day. And then I would get on a bus and I would go to New York City for the second half of the day.
Oh.
And I would go on like auditions, go-sees, or if I had a job, if I had a booking, I would do the booking. And I screen tested for some of the soaps. There used to be 7 soaps out of New York and 7 out of LA. So I screen tested and I was on several soaps and I sort of had this creative life going. And I ended up leaving New York City. I met a guy. So I left New York City and I sort of like tucked this whole creative part of myself away. And I really didn't remember her or know who she was. And about 11 years ago, I really started to feel kind of like unsettled. And, just this whole idea of like, well, who am I and who was I supposed to be? And like, I wasn't really able to reconcile those two identities. And at the same time, I had a friend who self-published a book. And one afternoon we were at another friend's house and we were sort of brainstorming about how she was going to go in and she was going to be speaking to a local school. And we were brainstorming about how to create a presentation. And this really got my creative juices flowing. And so I went home and I thought, oh, well, and it was a children's book she was writing. And I was like, well, I can write a children's book. So I sat down and I proceeded to try to write a children's book. And I knew nothing I had my undergrads in literary studies. So I was always a big reader and I liked to read, and I would write really bad poetry, like all through my young adulthood. But anyway, so I sat down and wrote a children's book and I tried to figure out, well, how do I get this published? And I sent it to some places and it all got promptly rejected. But at the same time, like this sort of like this niggling started, like, Heather, you really are and I've been in business, like I'm a businesswoman also in my other life, but I felt very unfulfilled. So I had this scene in my head about this girl who is in a car accident and she's been with her boyfriend and she's like thrown out of the car, and it's like a wet fall night in Pennsylvania. A deer runs out and sort of like, that's what causes the accident. And like, she's on the side of the road and she's losing consciousness. And her last thought, like the reader is in the story with the girl, is that she has a secret. And she's decided she's going to tell her boyfriend and she's going to tell her mother. And then her world goes black. She loses consciousness. So anyway, I had this like scene in my head, and my father, who'd always been like my first reader, and he'd given me books as a child, and I let him read it. And he's like, I think it's good. Well, of course our parents think it's good, but it really meant a lot to me that he liked it. So I started writing this book. Well, that scene became the prologue
Uh,
of what the Valley knows. But I had no idea how to write a book. And I'm taking a really long-winded way of answering your question.
that's excellent.
Um, but that's sort of what led me into my MFA program, where we met
Right.
at the Solstice MFA program. And then What the Valley Knows became my creative thesis. And that's sort of how it got started.
Gotcha.
And then, so we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but this whole, the Listen to Your Mother and the Tales from the Other Side, they have this performance piece to them. So for me, it really marries like both of my worlds, because I started out in sort of that show business side and, and then became a writer. So these productions are a way that sort of combine these two things that I really love.
Right. You're a lot of you, like, I'll get to this later, but like, I have never had an opportunity to talk with you at length, even though we went to the same school. And the more I learn about you, the more I'm like, oh my God, I had that same thing. Like, I wrote a very similar story, but my protagonist doesn't necessarily have, a secret that turns into a novel. But you were talking about how like 11 years ago, you just were like, there's something off and there's something missing. And my experience started 12 years ago when I went back to college as a mature adult and realized that I too was in the business world running our family business, and I wanted to go back and do it. What did I want to do? And of course, I took a lot of backlash. Like, you can't do anything with a writing degree, and and then to get your associates, your bachelor's degree, then your MFA, and then now there's all this pressure to continue that education, and it's like for a creative writing degree, right? But look what comes out of it. So these amazing stories and these amazing creative works, and like you're talking about the crossover to the performance, and my crossover is poetry and these amazing ways that we get to express ourselves, but also express the world and help the world see things that they wouldn't be able to see in a creative and memorable way. But along that same line, building off of that, what obstacles, I know you said you met a guy and that kind of like switched things, but were there any other obstacles that maybe put your life on hold or put these dreams on hold, or maybe you just thought, maybe that's not what I want to be right now? Anything like that happen?
Well, I think in any of the arts, whether it's writing, painting, acting, it's really hard to make a living and to monetize it. So, that was a big piece of, my early adulthood and even coming into middle age, was the whole idea that, you need to make money to live, and then when you're raising a family, there's all these responsibilities that also come along with that. And especially as women, and it's not the case all the time, but, it's still, most of it falls on us, I think, the child rearing, the
Right.
household management, things like that. It's like a lot to juggle. So it's not that I intentionally said I don't want to pursue this artistic side or this creative side. It's just sort of life got in the way of doing that. And it wasn't until, my children were a little tiny bit older. I mean, they'd started like middle school and stuff, that I really started to turn inward again and think of like, well, what is that? Like, and how can I honor that piece of me? So that, that was a big part of it. And then once I actually got into the writing and then the publication process, we could talk for hours about those obstacles.
Yes.
That you run into, and like the whole path to publication is a grueling one. And I don't know like how much detail you want to go in, or if you want to ask me specific questions about it, but just like being able to get an agent, like the process, what that entails. And then, even once you've gotten your agent, that doesn't necessarily mean your book is going to sell. And, I've been through it twice now. I've gone into the query trenches twice. I've come out 2 times with 2 different agents, and, that's a whole nother conversation. And I'll let you just sort of guide like how much you want me. And so when you talk about obstacles, there's like gatekeeper upon gatekeeper to sort of make it into the temple, so to speak. And then even once you do have a publisher, especially as an indie author, which is I think most of your listeners probably understand that someone who's published by an independent publisher, not one of the big five, indie authors have a whole different path with a whole bunch of other obstacles. And much of the marketing, it's sort of like hand-to-hand combat that the author needs to do themselves, because these small publishers or smaller publishers, they don't have the marketing budgets to promote their books in the ways that I think maybe the public has this kind of misconception
Yes.
about.
Agreed. And until you go through it or watch people go through that experience, you don't know exactly what's involved. And I just started, my second book got picked up by an independent publisher, and I'm in the, beginning processes of actually working with someone on these things. And so they have a team, but it's, it's a small outfit as far as that goes. And so I'm waiting to hear back from them to see like what exactly they plan to, collaborate on, or what they plan to take care of themselves, and what I can expect. And it's a whole new experience for me, because my first experience was a small literary press, and nothing, no interaction, no promotion. No, it was so like in a poetry book is like already just a daunting task to try to promote and release to the world. So I think, like, depending on how this goes, I would love to do another segment on specifically, talking maybe with a panel of a few authors about the indie publishing process and our different experiences. So
here's the thing too. I have some friends who've been published by very big publishers, and they've gotten huge advances. And once they've kind of worked through the process, the thing they're finding also is that unless you are a marquee title, like the lead title, you don't get the marketing dollars either. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So much of the promotion and the marketing still falls on the author, even coming out of one of the big houses.
Wow.
And I just know that through, some of my friends who have had, bigger publishers pick up their work.
That's interesting. So yeah, I would love to do a panel. So we'll definitely talk about that after our talk today, and figure out if, who we could bring together for that, maybe collaborate on that. But so I want to talk about, first of all, congratulations on your forthcoming new novel, Lying Season.
Thank you.
Like your debut novel, What the Valley Knows, this novel is set in your created small Pennsylvania town, Millington Valley, which, I didn't realize when I was reading your first book that I was like, is that a place? Until like, I realized, like, once I started looking into it, like, oh my gosh, no, this isn't, but you made it really feel like it is an actual place, which, isn't a new art, but still it's exciting when you get to experience that. So what can you tell me and tell us about creating this small Pennsylvania town?
So people have often asked me, is your book autobiographical, or are your books autobiographical? Right. And certainly there's certain elements that are inspired by real life.
Right.
And for me, What the Valley Knows, probably the most autobiographical element of the book is the town. So Millington Valley, I grew up in a small town called, it was the Ole Valley. And it's a beautiful, small Pennsylvania town. So I've taken a lot of the Ole Valley and put that into Millington Valley. But at the same time, I used my creative license, and I've pulled from other towns that, like people I know have lived in, or that I've traveled through, but it very much has the flavor of my local area. And so local readers will say like, oh, I know where you're talking about, or I know this, or that's not right. That's not the way it is. And then I have to remind them, I'm like, yeah, but it's fictional. It's a fictional town. So I've used the bits and pieces that I've wanted to use. But yeah, I would very much say that sense of place is the most autobiographical element, especially in What the Valley Knows. Now, the Lying Season's a little different because that was sort of inspired by some true life events. But again, the town is really a very real thing that's been fictionalized.
And I like that. You're kind of, as I'm listening to you describe this, I'm recalling. So my dad builds these model train and slot car little little, what do you call them? Not the diorama, but the whole landscape. And there were many times, he's actually working on one right now that I can remember as kids, like collecting things and buying things and putting them on there. And of course, it didn't look exactly like these places we were trying to recreate, because you can't possibly get all those things, but you were bringing in things where you're like, I wish that was there, right?
Right.
I wish that was next to that. And it you kind of have to set yourself up to have then the stories play out, right? And have the actual landscape and atmosphere that these characters need to fulfill, whatever is going on in the storyline. But you mentioned that the stories, so some of the stories that take place in this new novel were inspired by real life instances then.
Yeah, so the lion season, it's set against a soccer season.
Okay.
And so what happens is it's 5 kids, a girl, her 2 brothers, and 2 other brothers. And there's sort of like a love triangle going on with the other 2 brothers. And it's set against a soccer season. Like the boys are all in this soccer season. And so my brothers my older brother's senior soccer season, they had this really charismatic soccer coach who was partly loved by the community and partly hated. But he took a real liking to our family, and we sort of became like his second children. Mm-hmm. And we'd come from this like very small country town, and there was this perennial powerhouse, another small country town that had this incredible soccer program. And like our goal in our town was always to try to beat them, and we could never beat them. And they'd won state championships and on. But anyway, we ended up landing this really great charismatic coach who he impacted my life in a lot of ways. He ended up actually introducing me to someone who I ended up marrying and then later divorced. But he had a huge impact on my brother's lives too. And in the season, my brother's senior soccer season, and my father was a doctor. So there's one of the characters in the book. It's not the father, it's the mother is a doctor. But they came, the coach, his name was Ron in real life. Ron and his wife came over for dinner one night, and he had sort of like a tender spot on his shin, and asked my dad to look at it. And my dad, who was never an alarmist, was very alarmed and sent him to the hospital the next morning. And it turned out he was 41 years old. He had advanced stage 4 lung cancer. And he ended up dying my brother's senior soccer season, in the season. And part of it, we ended up beating that team we could never beat the day after he died. So his widow was there we gave him the ball. But anyway, so this is sort of the backdrop. It's inspired by this like real life season that happened. But the crux of the story is Piper, who's the main character. Her and her brothers and these 2 other guys that I said, like, there's this love triangle. They're out one night partying at the quarry, like out here in Pennsylvania, like the kids can go out in the woods and there aren't any parents or anybody around for miles. So I sort of made up this place in Millington Valley where there's like a quarry and a lake, and they're out there partying one night, and there's this vagabond who kind of roams the valley, and they're hunting. Long story short, there's an accidental shooting, and they end up shooting this man accidentally, thinking it's a deer. And the moral question at the crux of the book is the kids don't know what to do. They're trying to get him out of the quarry, but they don't have any cell service, and they think that he dies when they're trying to carry him out, and they end up leaving him there. And to come back, they're going to come back, but they're, all this stuff's going on. But when they come back, he's gone. Right.
Right.
So we have like this whole moral question of like what to do. Do they turn themselves in? And then it's set against the backdrop of the soccer season where their coach is dying.
Oh, right. So yeah, lots of tensions. I love it.
But that whole part about, the shooting the guy, like none of that's real. Like that's completely fictionalized, and made up.
Of course.
So yeah, so the book is close to my heart, and I'm anxious to have it come out and, see what happens with it.
So now, do any I mean, but does anything from What the Valley Knows inspire any of this stuff also in the next book, or?
So in What the Valley Knows, the high school is the same. So the kids, the main characters are different, right? You have new
Okay.
kids flowing in and out of a high school. They're only there for 4 years at a time. But some of the peripheral characters in What the Valley Knows are also in the lying season. So this would be like the coach, not the, well, the coach isn't in the first one. The police officer, Sheriff Miss Mo's in both books. The English teacher, Mr. Franks, he's in both books. So there's like little mentions of characters in both, and then a couple characters actually float through to the next book, but not the main characters. The main characters are entirely different.
All right. So my next set of questions, you kind of touched into a little bit. So I'm kind of like looking at them. So your work, what I enjoy about reading your work in particular is that it probes the gray spaces between right and wrong choices, and then the consequences that arise. You know, no matter how much you try to bury these things, right? And that's like a recurring thing for me in my own writing. I keep coming back to that over and over. You know, that these things happen as a result of these choices. The consequences cannot stay buried forever. And so how do these patterns emerge in your storylines? I know you told us a little bit about what inspired, you know, some of the things in Lying Season, but in particular here, you had those things up front where you were like, okay, I'm gonna use these. These will make really great story elements. But, you know, did you have these ideas about these right and wrong things up front? Or do these things kind of do the events and then the consequences emerge as you write through the characters, you know, interactions?
I think in these cases, the events happened first. But in both books, because they're both young adult books, and I think that's such a critical period in a person's life, and when they have to make their first big decisions, you know?
Yes.
And oftentimes they're not as dramatic as what's happening in my books. Like in the first book, we have this car accident, this rape, and all this other stuff. And now in this book, we have this accidental shooting and things like that. So it's sort of taking that moment of decision and amplifying it. So I knew in both books going in that there was going to be like some sort of moral dilemma that the characters needed to kind of work through. And this whole question of what is the right thing to do? And then how do you do the right thing? And it's still sort of, even, especially in the lying season, it's very ambiguous on what is the actual right thing to do. And that's the question that the characters, they all wrestle with it. Yeah.
As should your readers.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the first draft of the book went through many drafts. And my agent, my original draft had a much kind of tie the bow on the box, neatly cleaned up sort of ending. And my agent cut it. Like the part I thought was like the most beautiful, like the epilogue. He's like, no. It needs to have a little bit of a little more messy of an ending. So, and at this point in my career, like I'm willing to take that advice. You know, like in the beginning, I would have been, and I know that now as being a producer and an editor on the backside of my productions, like the more seasoned a writer, the more open and willing they are to take edits. You know, it's like the newer writers I find are more married to what they've said and how they've said it, and are less. So in that book, The Lying Season, when my agent's like, no, we're going to chop this ending, I'm like, you know, I had like a sort of a moment of like pain. And then I'm like, okay, let's go. What are we going to do?
Right. But the beautiful thing about that experience also isn't just the maturity and growing thicker skin and, you know, just growing and knowing what's involved with the art, but also getting to work with people who you trust their sensibilities.
Right.
And, you know, it's like, all right, I have to trust you on this. It's not like somebody's like, okay, this foreign person has your manuscript and they are just going to just tell you how it's going to be and they take over the work. It's, you know, it's, to me, that's been I haven't had that experience so much so in writing a novel work, but even in my my debut self-help book, that's going to come out in the next year, I hired an editor's editor because I was like, okay, look, I edit for other people. This is what people pay me to do, but I want somebody else's eyes on this. And there were a couple of parts, and you could just see her trying to frame it too in a way like, don't. And I was like, no, I hired you because I particularly trust you. And she came highly recommended, and she made the work better. And so there were things where she was like, cut this, totally, like, trust your readers. You hear that thing, trust that people will get that. Don't talk to them in patronizing ways. Don't make this feel like an anecdote. And that, when I was reading I meant to read a little synopsis from the book, and I totally got ahead of myself. But there is a part on one of your pages where you talk about the moral message. And I really like, and I'm just like, oh, because you don't want it to feel like an anecdote. And it's hard when you're writing for young adult readers and for young, young, not just young adults, but newer adults also, right? That whole genre of new adult that doesn't quite fit into young adult or adult fiction, is that you don't want it to feel like an anecdote or like it's this morally compassed message where then they're like, but I love what you just said in response to that, without even being asked that, the idea that, the characters just have to figure that out. So everything is a little bit messy, and the ultimate, right, what ultimately happens, you set the trajectory. So, the characters will know how that is going to play out. And the mystery of it, that we don't have it all tied with a nice bow for a reader, is really nice also, because then you don't feel like insulted, like somebody's interpreting that ending, or, trying to minimize this fabulous, right? You have all these layers of tension and really great things going on, and then it gets minimized into this, like, here's your moral message. And I love that isn't what your book is, right? That isn't what your work is. I know that wasn't the impression that I got from the first book either. So, so in moving into some of your other works, I'm really interested in knowing about Listen to Your Mother. It's Listen to Your Mother, or Listen to Your Mothers? It's Listen to Your Mother, right?
It's Listen to Your Mother. So Listen to Your Mother is a national storytelling show. It's the tagline is giving motherhood a microphone. And it was created by a woman named Anne Imig. And so the idea is it's real women. So, but these can be professional writers, actors, or just your, average mom or dad. Anybody who has something to say about motherhood, the good, the bad, the happy, the sad. And the idea is they write a piece of about 1,000 words that has something to say about motherhood. And then I'm the producer. So how I first got involved, though, I auditioned in Baltimore and for a piece for their Listen to Your Mother in 2017. And I was accepted. Well, not accepted, it's not the right word. I was picked to be part of the cast. And so I was in the Listen to Your Mother Baltimore 2017, and it was a really wonderful experience. And I was like, wow, I think I would like to bring this to my town. And I ended up buying the theatrical license. So Anne Imig, she did it for a couple years on her own. And then she worked with this company called Miracle or Two Productions to license it, which is what she did. And also in part of that, though, Listen to Your Mother is about 10 or 12 years old. I'm not sure how old. She also created an anthology. So there's an anthology called Listen to Your Mother, which is some of the best stories that have come out from all over the country, the best, essays. So it's a book you can buy and give as a gift. But anyway, so I bought the theatrical license for the greater Berks County area. And in 2019 had my first show. And we held open auditions, and we had, I'd say, like 35 people try out. And the cast is comprised of 12. So we picked the 12. And the challenge there is you're trying to get stories that create a journey for the audience. So it can't be all like, we would have this joke. I had a panel of people helping me during the auditions. We're like, oh my gosh, if we get one more dead mom story, like we can't take it.
Right.
And like for everybody, people writing, the dead mom story, it's like very poignant and powerful. and we can only take one of those. We can take one of those for the show. So,
Right.
and I always tell people, if you write funny, you're almost in for sure, because nobody will write funny. Because
Really?
you want something fun, you want your tearjerker, you're funny, you're empowering, something that's inspiring, and so on. So we did our first show in 2019 locally, and we raised money for the local community college, because you always partner. The model is that you partner with a local charity. But we had a phenomenal success. We had over 500 people attend the first show.
Wow.
And we got lots of press, and everybody's really jazzed up about it. So for 2020, we went through all the auditions, and we had our first cast dinner and rehearsal. I think it was February 28th, and we're here on the East Coast. And COVID hit really hard, like the next week.
Right.
So the performances are always done around Mother's Day. So my 2020 cast, that whole show was canceled. And now we just passed 2021, and in Pennsylvania, we still are not able to congregate in big groups. So my 2020 cast will probably be the cast for 2022 next May. So that's Listen to Your Mother kind of in a nutshell. And then, but this gave me the idea, and I have a really good friend, Amy Impellizzeri, who's also a local writer here in Pennsylvania. And we've, sort of been on this writing journey together, and we came up with the idea. We're like, wouldn't a Listen to Your Mother type of show, like live stories, true stories about, like the extraordinary, the supernatural, the unexplained. So we said, so we're building a program right now called Tales from the Other Side. And it's stories of the supernatural, extraordinary, and unexplained. And it can be anything, right? Like definitely ghost stories, of course, but anything that sort of makes your hair stand up on the back of your neck, like synchronicities that are unexplained or really odd coincidences. And, or even, because we've talked about big life events that you have to get to the other side of, like, a death, a divorce, a job loss, anything, like we're keeping it really wide open. We want extraordinary stories. So we are doing the inaugural show here in Pennsylvania this October, Halloween weekend.
Nice.
So we'll be having auditions in June and July, and then we'll do our rehearsals, we'll edit the pieces, and we're hoping, because COVID now, the restrictions are being dropped, and by October that we'll be able to have a large gathering. And then our hope is to do what Ann Imig did, and we've talked with Miracle or Two Productions about licensing it and then taking it out, across the country. So like people like you, you could do it in Detroit or something like that.
Right.
And everybody loves a ghost story. So we feel like that it should have a good pull. It's like a really unique, different sort of thing to do. And in our case, we're partnering with a local women's charity called Safe Berks. So we're going to raise money for Safe Berks.
Now, is that a trafficking organization? Oh, you just froze. Oh, technical difficulties.
Okay, there. I think you're back.
There you go. Okay. Did you hear my question?
Yeah, you said, is it a trafficking?
Yeah, is that a trafficking?
It's actually, no, it's a women's shelter for abused women.
Okay, all right. A lot of
So we're really excited about that, and we're hoping. Now, here's the thing I'm finding though, between being the producer of Listen to Your Mother and now the co-producer of Tales from the Other Side, our auditions, we had a lot more people signing up to audition for Listen to Your Mother, because I don't know why. It's more universal. It's easier. Everybody has a story about their mom or motherhood in some case. And not everybody has a story, and it's a sort of harder story to craft.
I have ideas for you. So as I was, stalking all of your media to try to put together this interview, I've seen that in, bio lines of yours, and I couldn't get any information. And it said, if you want more information, just email us. And so one of the questions that I have is, do these stories have to be, is this creative nonfiction, or is some of this stuff fiction based on maybe like, a spin on something like an urban legend that, belongs to maybe your small valley town, and then you're going to fictionalize it, but really try to, hold true to the actual storyline, but put characters into it.
So the idea, and this is, it's all new, so it's open to modification as we move forward. The idea is that they're true stories, that it's something that's actually happened. But that might end up being too much of a challenge. Maybe it's going to morph into something else. At this moment in time, these are like true stories of, ghost stories and supernatural, synchronicity, anything like that. And most people have something that they just can't explain.
Yeah.
But
for sure.
Maybe it is going to morph into, fictionalized pieces. And again, they're short pieces. So it's like 1,000 words or less.
Okay. But no,
when read aloud, you don't want them to be more than about 6 to 7 minutes, because people get bored, no matter how great the story is.
Right, for sure.
They can't listen to one thing for more than 6 or 7 minutes.
Right.
So that's a big part of my job as the producer and as the editor is to cut. Nobody wants to cut, but we got to cut. So we got it.
Right. But I would put together like a little trailer or something to give people an idea of what you're trying to accomplish with this.
It's funny that you say that, because I just recorded a whole bunch of little like teasers, like information about, and I have just been slow to get, like, literally we will be pushing those out in the next week or two.
Awesome.
That explain like what is Tales from the Other Side and what are we looking for. So yeah.
So what do you use? So Miracle or Two publications, is that something that is a part of Listen to Your Mother? Or
no, okay, so it's called Miracle or Two Productions. They're out in New York City. So, and what they do is they create and market theatrical licenses. So like, say somebody writes an original play and then they want to like syndicate, for lack of a better word, the play. If it's represented by Miracle or Two Productions, they are the ones who like sort of connect the dots, put the creator together with the person who wants to produce the play.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Right. So in our case, so in Ann Emig's case, she had Miracle or Two Productions licensed Listen to Your Mother. So then people like me who are interested in the licensing rights for this area, I contact Miracle or Two and I work with them to get the license so that I have the right to produce that show here.
Okay.
So that's what we would be doing with them for Tales from the Other Side.
Okay. All right. I'm like, I think other people want to know this too. So I'm in the process of putting together 2 trailers for my upcoming book, but I also have this really cool idea to get people to come together once a week to post things online. And I don't want to do any spoiler alerts right now, but it's also part of the outreach and the self-help process. Is I'm trying to put these 2 trailers together, and we've got some, we do have some good footage. I need to get more. But what do you use? Do you guys farm that out, or do you and Amy sit down and figure it out through a certain app?
So I'll tell you.
We lost you again.
Frozen up again on me.
Yep. Okay. I hear you now.
Okay. So I don't know if you heard me say on my first book, I hired a company to produce a trailer for What the Valley Knows. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it was like 1 minute and it was really, they were out of LA and
I loved it.
What's that?
I said, I loved it so much. I thought I can't wait to have an opportunity to do the same thing. And that's what I'm trying to work on right now.
Yeah. So they were expensive though. Like, and that was something, it was like almost like a vanity piece of it. Like I wanted to have a trailer and my publisher was not paying for it. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to do it. So now on my second book, I am not hiring them to do a trailer. And I don't know, as we get closer, maybe I will do something, because what I've been doing with the videos that Amy and I are producing for Tales from the Other Side, I've just been using iMovie.
Okay.
And I would not call myself a technical expert, but I feel like they're coming out decent,
Right.
so I think, yeah, well, I know for sure that's what I'm going to be using for Tales from the Other Side, is I'm just using iMovie.
Okay.
And we'll see how that goes. And maybe I'll create my own trailer, certainly not with live actors or things like that for the lying season.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's always a, that the trailer thing is a very interesting, it's very broad also, like a lot of times, because originally I was going to self-publish the book that I have coming out, and I was looking at different things, and I saw a lot of the packages included these, what they call the book trailer, but then when you would click them, they were like these PowerPoint slideshows, which I use PowerPoint to put together my videos and trailers, but they were just pictures of the book and just moving text, and like really I was like, that's not a trailer, right? And so like seeing yours, and who else has some really, I've seen a few authors who do a really good job. It's Bonnie Jo Campbell, the Michigan author.
Okay.
There's been a couple of her media things, that like trailers and things like that I'm like taking note. I'm like, that's awesome. I have to recreate stuff like that and borrow those strategies and things. So you were definitely one of the people where I was like, I'm glad I saw it before I started looking at some of these things, because if somebody said that, oh, I can do this for you for free, it's included, it's like, well, I could do that better.
Right. And that's like, so for the lying season, because I don't know, like return on investment, if the trailer that I produced for What the Valley Knows, I don't know that it was a wise investment. Do you know what I mean? When I look purely on the dollar to dollar return. So I think for the lying season, I will do something that's much more scaled back. We'll see.
Gotcha. All right. So I'm just looking at some of the questions I had. So we really kind of talked about also the Tales from the Other Side. And I really am. So when you have information about these open calls, please, just like post them on the Pink Panther page, because we work, we don't have a huge following. We are international, but we do have enough of a following. And I want to encourage other listeners also, if you have these literary or these creative outlets, post them on our wall. Like tell say people, I direct the Detroit Writers Guild, and a lot of times people just expect me to see their stuff and share it, or they'll send me an email, hey, can you post, like, just post it. Just post it on the wall. I mean, the worst thing that happens is like someone's like, oh, we can't have that. But I personally manage both of these pages. And if you post it on the Pink Panther wall and it's something like that, I will definitely then share it on the Detroit Writers Guild. But when you have anything to share about open calls, or if you do decide to do a trailer, that could be a very quick way to let us know, and to tap into, right, our network of, we work with a ton of writers and artists also, and a lot of times the artists and the writers from the original I want to say app, this venue that we all met through, Redbubble, which is a place where people sell art, and a lot of us writers found each other there. A lot of the writers and artists have known each other for the last, like, I've been a part of this group for 12 years, and they work together and they love collaborating on things. And a lot of them aren't just like artists that are, a lot of them create like sets and props and things like that, and go into different spaces and use their creativity for other things. And so anyhow, that would be something that I would love to try to connect our, to see where else the scope of where else you could bring these things. So I really wanted to talk to you. So, all right. So I kind of, so I'm bringing it back to something I said earlier. So as a fellow traveler, who I ironically feel like I'm always just a few steps behind you on the publication journey, I'm continually amazed at your self-promotion of your work. And sometimes even paying professionals doesn't work optimally, or doesn't even work at all. And I know you probably have some, stories to share on that. But, I think this like trial and error is probably a big thing, but learning how to best approach PR and marketing for literary works in particular is overwhelming. And it often is defeating or feels defeating and overwhelming and what is even the word, like hopeless. Like there is no, right, I'm not getting anywhere, like you're spinning your wheels. But sometimes I'm gonna even forget that. I don't want to digress. So I know I'm not alone when I say I'm curious to know what strategies you in particular rely on, and how did you learn some of these strategies? Can you share some of your insider secrets?
Sure. So when I was trying to land my first agent, I did not have a website. I did not have any presence, any social media presence at all. And I ended up getting an agent, and then we were like trying to sell the book, and we were getting a lot of feedback. And ultimately what it came down to was the idea that like publishers want to publish books of writers who have some readership already. And so I then took it upon myself. I'm like, okay, I need to build up some readership. So I started a blog, and for a year, so it was 52 times, I blogged every week for a year. So it was really intense and I couldn't keep it up. But what happened is in that year, I created a mailing list, and I created a Heather Christie Books on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter. So I started to build a platform that way. And then because my idea was like, okay, well, I want to have at least, 1,000 people who I know will buy this book and read the book. And then as I got closer to my publication date on What the Valley Knows, I started to do a lot more promotion on Facebook, especially like I do. And I did it last time and I'm doing it this time. Like I do a countdown. So I have like these numbers I hold up, like, 3 months to go. And now I'm doing a new thing too, because Millington Valley is inspired by a lot of local places here. I'm doing like a Where's Heather, and I'm taking a picture of myself in a place that was then inspired me to put in the book.
I love it.
For local readers. And so I'm trying to do stuff like that. And then I spent one whole day recently creating 15 memes of quotes from the book that I now have scheduled on Facebook, so I don't have to look at it again. That'll be released between now and when the book comes out. And I have like, the buy link there. So if people want to, so it's just like this like constant like trying to get yourself in front of people, which feels really weird sometimes. Like, and I have like my friend Amy, who I think you probably said you'd want to interview. She's super great at this self-promotion. Like she can just put herself out there. And I still have like some reservation about doing that, like, cause I'm naturally a pretty private person, even though I'm okay, like for the camera, like, okay, when it's time, like that's the performance part of me.
Right.
But naturally I'm more introverted and more private. So, and even with the blogging, like that got to feel a little bit uncomfortable because like my kids don't want me writing about them. And, I went through some big personal changes in the last couple of years, and it's like, okay, so like, how much am I really willing to put out there of myself? And like, and then the other question is, well, am I nonfiction or am I fiction? I kind of like go back and forth between the two genres, and I've done like some magazine writing and stuff like that. So, but my biggest self-promotion things were, one, creating the blog and being consistent with it. And then two, getting like the Facebook and the Instagram. And like once my advanced reader copies come out for the next book, and I do have, I'll give you a sneak peek of the cover. Once we get the advanced reader copies, like I'll start doing some contests too with that, like just to try to generate excitement. Another thing I did on the first book was there's this app called Thunderclap. Do you know it?
No.
So the idea is that you ask people to, it's like the idea is that you have a clap of thunder on the day that your book releases. So you ask people ahead of time to commit to making an announcement on Thunderclap, and they do. And then what happens is it either goes out on their Facebook or their Twitter on the day of your release, like as a big clap.
So you get them to, they do that ahead of time. So it's
Yeah.
like scheduling. I love that because a lot of times you get people to commit and then they forget. And then if you're just like, can you just please share this? But if you're having the conversation with someone and saying, here, let's just set it up now, and then it will just magically, right, appear.
Yeah. So Thunderclap does that. The other thing I did, because I had the trailer, we have a little indie movie theater, and I did my book signing there, and I asked them, they played the trailer for like the 3 weeks leading up to the book release before each of their movies.
Oh, I love it.
That was that was self-promotion. I also went, because with an indie publisher, like the big guys are not going to carry your book. So I went to our local Barnes and Noble and asked to speak to the manager and said, can you bring my book in? And they did initially, and they ended up selling like 77 books, which is really good, a good amount for them to sell. But they wouldn't have done that had I not done the legwork, in there and said, can you bring my book in stock? So some of that you need to do too, go to your local bookstores and say, look, I'm going to have a book releasing, and can you get, some copies on hand?
Right. Now, are there other places, like, did you go to like local grocery stores or places like that, like the big box stores that, I don't know if you guys even have, like Walmart too. Did you go to any of those places that were local?
No, I didn't go to them. And I don't know if I will this time or not. I'll go back to our Barnes and Noble, and we have an indie bookstore that I'll go to make sure they're carrying it. Some gift shops around the area. Like a lot of times they'll take books on consignment too. So I'll go to those places, but I'm not in the same kind of like market you're probably in like Detroit. I'm like in a smaller.
I live in a small town. I'm way out there. So I'm an hour and a half north, and I'm in a really rural area. So I have to drive everywhere. I don't even have a local bookstore for 25, 30 miles. So gotcha. I have to drive everywhere for everything, including groceries. Mm-hmm. And so it does create that kind of obstacle, because you have to go and find literary community as well. And so in the Metro Detroit area, I'm pretty plugged in, and my work with the Detroit Writers Guild kind of helps me stay connected with that. But I think what I've been finding too is, I've been, first of all, I originally was a fiction writer. Like I do write fiction, and so my BFA is fiction focus, and then my MFA is poetry focus with the pedagogy focus to teach. And when I was writing my debut poetry collection, I have several poetry collections. I have several short story collections and hybrids of the two. And I didn't want to write about myself. Like I didn't want to do that, right? And like I just, God just kept putting it on my heart, and like that's the book that's going to get published first. You need to write that book. And it was like, I don't write. I'm private. My family hates when I talk about them. And so like this was a big deal for me to figure out what to say, right? The nuances of what not to say, and then to put that work out there. But looking forward, I never would have come up with my next book or the outreach or all the books I'm writing now in response to that had I not been on book tour with my coming of age stories. And so it's a the journey is really interesting, and how we are led to do other things, but in all of that, my whole network is with poets and even fiction writers and authors. And so now I find myself in a point where I can't get a blurb for my book cover. Like my book, the people I'm reaching out to, like, I don't know anybody in the self-help genre. And then some people are like, well, reach out to other people in the literary world. But a lot of people are just like, and they're all bombarded.
Right.
The task of writing these, but it's like, you also want to get a blurb from somebody who is known, beyond your small little community or beyond your small little town. And so like, that's the crux that I'm at right now. And I actually just said to my publisher, my marketing team, I was like, in any, like direction you can give me in this regard, I have no idea where to go next other than paid blurbs, which I see some people do use, they go to the bigger magazines and news outlets, and they get these blurbs, but something, they pay. And so you talk about the trailer, like how much money do you invest in these things? And
Right.
does that look bad in the industry if you do that? So how do you, so I guess
Well, I think the general public doesn't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you end up paying for a blurb that goes on your book, the average reader is going to have no idea that you paid for it. So maybe it's worth it to pay for it. I mean, I really, they all think we're published by HarperCollins. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Beyond the people in like our little literary community, and the other people don't know. They have no idea.
No, yeah, that's true. That's a good point. And that's where I'm at in the process. And you're probably going, I'm watching you go through the pre-launch process, where you're figuring out how much money to invest in these things, and you have at least the discernment and the experience to know this is what worked, and this is what didn't work, or I'm going to do this a little differently. I think the last thing, unless you have something else also that you want us to know about, like, are there like golden nugget things that you're like, absolutely avoid this, or absolutely try this? Is there any advice to people who are trying to, get their pre-launch or pre-sale stuff, or even continue on after the book comes out? There's still work. It's not just about before it comes out.
Well, I think one of the things you want to be focused on, which is something I'll start doing once I have my advanced reader copies too, is trying to build up reviews,
Yes.
on Amazon and on Goodreads.
Yes.
And so a lot of that's going to come through your personal network, the people who care about you already, either they're your literary friends or they're your actual friends, and really trying to start building your reviews, early on.
Now, do you send reviewer copies for those, like hard print copies?
Both. Some are electronic and some are hard print. And then in every book I sell, like if I'm doing a book signing, and now obviously I went and I normally, in the back of the book, the other thing I think is really great is to have, and I don't have one on me, bookmarkers. I think is a wise investment.
Oh, yes.
Because it's a great promotional tool. But I also put in every book, that I'm like hand selling, I put in in the back, a little piece of paper that talks about, like, if you liked the book, please place the review here. And it shows them exactly where to go and how to put a review on Amazon or Goodreads.
I love that.
And, encourage people in your network to ask their local bookseller, do they have your book? Ask the library, do you have your book? I have a little meme, I don't know where it is. It says, like how to help the author in your life. And, one is like buy her book as a gift and give it to people. Ask your library if they have her book. And if not, ask them to get it. The same thing with the local bookstores.
Right.
So I think those are like some of the tips, is like it's really like hand-to-hand combat, like one reader at a time kind of thing, and encouraging them to spread the word. And they do that like through the review process.
No, I love that. I love the little thing that you put in the back of, literature that you put in the book, review it here. But I also like, things start to come together for you, because I'm sure you're like me, you're watching other people,
right?
And you're networking with other writers. And I think it was Lisa Allen from a poetry graduate, a recent poetry graduate from Solstice, who she just posted something. I didn't get to read it all the way, but there's a form on your library site that you can actually request that they put a book in, that they purchase books.
Exactly.
And so it's not just saying it, like literally going to your library website and saying, hey, here's a list of books that and it's, you just say, like, I think you have to do one per one form per book, but here, I hope that, you would consider buying this book and buying this book and buying that book. I think that's a really great thing also to ask people, if you really enjoyed the book and you think other readers in your area would enjoy this book, help us bring it there by doing this thing. Those are great things, because and I know, like like you say, in my other life. So in my other life, I own a business, and my husband and I do carpet cleaning, and we've been doing viral disinfectant throughout the whole COVID thing. So we've been really busy. And we stopped advertising probably when the economy took a crash in 2004. We pulled all of that and we said, all right, we're not going to do that. We even stopped a few years after that doing like sending out mailers and stuff because we realized that, you know, to certain people that the best business we always got was word of mouth.
Yep.
Was right in your community and just, you know, just leaving your literature saying, hey, like, can I just have this available? And so when people tell you how great your place looks or that they're looking for something, you can point them in our direction and, you know, like legitimately refer someone. And so I like that kind of reinforces that concept too, that really word of mouth, even with your readers and how to get that out there.
How to encourage them, train them. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is, I love that. I'm definitely going to steal that. I love
Good.
that idea. You know, and figure out, I don't know what I'm going to put it on, but I'm going to figure it out. So, I mean, is there anything else you want to leave us with in closing?
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, the lying season's coming out September 9th. And if anybody's, you know, wants to get in contact with me, they can do that through my Facebook at heatherchristiebooks.com. And I'm on Facebook at heatherchristiebooks.com and Instagram at heatherchristiebooks.com. And Twitter is actually H Christie Books because we don't have as many characters we can use on Twitter.
All right.
But yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I love hearing from readers. I love when someone posts a review, and yeah, I wish you luck, and I hope we can talk more about how to bring Tales from the Other Side to Detroit, the Detroit area.
Absolutely. So, all right. So I'm going to sign off on this, but if you want to stick around, I'm going to see if I can, because I want to talk about meeting Amy. So,
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to say thank you for anybody who tuned in and for anybody who missed the live streaming. I will put the video up on my YouTube page and it will go up on pinkpanthermagazine.com. I have a blog and a podcast page, and so it will go up on there eventually. Okay, so thank you for that, and I'm going to stop live streaming now.
Okay, bye.
And all right.